Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, PBM, Customers Bank, Collins Building Services, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Marks Paneth, Capital One Bank. Additional funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Amerant Bank, Bank of America, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Catsimatidis Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, New Banks, Meridian Capital Group, Ocean First Bank, People's United Bank, RPW Group, TD Bank, and these friends.
Ooh, what's happening in Long Island? A lot of people have to take a lot of traffic going out to Long Island. Lots of people are moving to Long Island. So what's really taking place? What are the developments taking place today in Long Island? I've assembled 3 business leaders to provide their insight on developments in Long Island. My guests include Chris Hilton, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Lending Officer at the First National Bank of Long Island. Scott Berman, who has 3 different titles. He's a principal at Engel Berman. He is a principal at the Bristol Assisted Living. And last but not least, president of EMB Construction. And last but not least, Mr. Matt Classy, who is a co-founder and a managing member at GCP Capital Group. So, Chris, you're the man with the money, even though Matt helps people get the money. So tell me, what's happening with the availability of funds for projects in Long Island today?
I think there's ample capital available for projects at this point. It's certainly different than what we thought it was going to be 11 or 12 months ago when the world started changing. But I think at this point, there's ample capital available. Banks are willing to lend. Banks have tremendous liquidity at this point. We have a lot of customers who have very strong deposits right now, and we're looking for ways to lend it out. The challenging part is finding enough ways to lend it out right now. But I think Long Island in general has benefited from some of the disruption in New York City.
Scott, you seem to be as active as anyone else over there. I mean, the combination of the Engel Berman, the apartment buildings, the residential, and then the Bristol Assisting. So let's talk about some of the developments that you're doing, and then let's talk about some of the projects that you're even doing with Matt and with Chris.
Sure. So as you said, we've been incredibly active. We are wrapping up a bunch of residential projects. We've got about 800 rental units that we're bringing online as we speak, which is a very exciting endeavor for us. Pretty new product type. We're building out a whole platform to operate, manage them going forward. Just wrapped up a very successful condo project called the Seasons at Elwood. We're about to start another Seasons project in Dix Hills. That's our senior condo brand. And getting ready to start 2 new very exciting projects beginning of this year. So the first is a new Bristol Assisted Living in Bethpage, which should start in the next month or so. And we're getting ready to start a very large project in Long Beach, which will be frankly the largest project we've ever done, a combination of condos and rentals, 438 units on the beach in Long Beach.
Here's the big question. So who's renting these apartments? Are these people from Long Island, or are these people who are escaping New York City and other places wanting to come out to Long Island?
So it's an interesting phenomenon, Michael. They're Long Island people for the most part, but what we're seeing is a lot of New York City people are coming and buying their homes. So what people are doing is they're selling their homes. Frankly, due to COVID, they're getting 20, 30, 40% more than they might have a year ago. And then they're renting. And I think some of them are waiting to see what happens with the market, but or changing their lifestyle. We've got two new brands. One's geared towards seniors, older people, and the other is geared towards young people. We're seeing a lot of activity in both.
For the edification of seniors, okay, is it 55 and older, or is it senior citizens, or is it baby boomers? I mean, what's the real category of that?
So it's technically 55 and older. They're gated lifestyle communities with big, large clubhouses, but the people who come there are typically well into their 70s. So it's an older demographic for the most part than 55.
So Matt, tell me, as a intermediary, also as a lender, and also as an owner, how do you see the market in Long Island today?
Well, the market, Michael, is very strong at the moment, especially residentially, as Scott mentioned. The market, because of some of the movement, as you mentioned, from New York City out to the island, and also because of the velocity that's created by people's ability to sell their homes, the residential market, both for sale and for rental, is very, very strong. Case in point, Scott mentioned the Elwood development. My folks, back in January of 2020, were the first senior citizens to move into that complex. I don't know if Scott knows that, but they bought the #1 unit and they were the first to move in. They were able to do that because they were able to sell their home in Seaford, Long Island for a very good price, and allowed them to buy their home in Elwood debt-free, basically. And all the square footage was shrunk quite a bit, but their lifestyle has improved tremendously. Gated community, the clubhouse, and all the amenities that are provided in these types of developments is what the older person, and older is not that old these days, right? 55 is not considered a senior citizen in my book, because I'm past that number, but they have, that's what they wanted. So I think the old idea of living in a house and spending your weekend servicing that house, that's over. People want a lifestyle. They want to be able to turn the lock, leave, go to Florida for a number of months if that's what they prefer, and then come back to a house that's in a gated community that's intact. And Long Island is sorely missing that product type.
What happens to these communities that were built 20 years ago for the 55 and older?
I think, generally speaking, it's similar to what you would find in any residential environment. People want to have a fresh look. They want to go into something that's relatively new. So those that are 20 years old, if they've kept up, if they've done the capital improvements and kept it recent, then that'll attract the demand. If it's aged and the community hasn't kept up improvements, then I think the demand will be a lot softer in that type of situation.
We're still pretty underserved on Long Island with regard to these product types. It's still predominantly a single family home market. Because the entitlement process is so difficult on Long Island, not a lot of these new products come online, certainly not when you compare it to what we see on a national basis. So, we're underserved with regard to condominiums, greatly underserved with regard to rentals. So there's not enough product really to keep up with what the demand is. And I think Matt hit it on the head. The demand is growing.
Let's get to a different type of asset classes. Everybody loves industrial. I mean, this is the product of the day. Yeah, and going back to the roots of, Jan Berman, you were in the industrial business. You were there when people said, oh, industrial, that's a market I don't want to be involved with. Where do you see the market and what's going on in the market, all three of your opinions?
We had a very large industrial portfolio, my family did, but we sold it in the late 90s. And we still have some industrial assets, but we don't play all that much in the industrial space anymore. However, we are seeing a lot of activity in the properties we have with Amazon. We're seeing a lot of interest in the market from some of these distribution companies. We have a bunch of FedEx facilities. With the way the world is today, with COVID and clicking on for retail, distribution is definitely on fire. And I think the industrial market was hot pre-COVID, and COVID's been a catalyst for it going forward.
Amazon just recently signed about 8 leases in Nassau and Suffolk County. They even announced one in West Hampton Beach. Okay, where as a bank, how do you look at the industrial market?
Well, we're very comfortable with it. I agree with what Scott said. It is strong. It was strong pre-COVID, and that pace hasn't slowed. And yeah, I mean, there are investor situations, like you said. Amazon has signed leases, but we have a number of clients that are investing in industrial for owner-user situations, and they're manufacturers, they're distributors, but it is definitely an asset class that we are very comfortable with.
People are worried in certain markets with regard to the office market, especially in New York City, because people aren't running back to the office. There's probably people working 15 to 20% at the office. But I understand that the team over here, I'll call you the A team, all 3 of you, were involved recently with office financing. Let's talk about the office market and the office financing in Long Island.
Happy to jump in, but also not an area that we play that heavily in. Only have a couple of office buildings, and recently purchased a building that we're going to put one of our businesses in to occupy. But we haven't seen a lot of tenants renegotiating. For the most part, from our perspective, things on Long Island have been status quo. We also haven't seen a lot of New York City firms looking for satellite offices or coming out to Long Island. So from my perspective, I haven't seen a lot of activity.
Matt?
So from a financing perspective, Michael, I could tell you that there is plenty of money and many lenders willing to look at that product type. But they are being much more, and rightfully so, much more conservative and discreet in which properties they will finance. A well-located, well-run office product with the right sponsorship will get financed. I'll have multiple bids on any one offering. Again, if it's well-located and there's good cash flow. Of course, the lenders are concerned about lease term and the potential for vacancy. And I think what's happening now in this COVID environment, most lenders for those product types are requiring and insisting upon COVID reserves, so that if for some reason we should take a turn for the worse and the tenancy should maybe stop paying for a period of time, there is a reserve to get us through that hump. So I would say it's a very financeable product type, but lenders are looking at that product type with a microscope a little more these days.
Chris, you're the lender, okay? And you recently did a financing for Scott's company, and Matt was the intermediary. How do you look at the office? Because I'm a little worried about the office in the suburban area. In New York City, the B office buildings are having major difficulties. The tenants aren't being there. They don't want to work all the time. As a lender, how do you look at the office market, especially in Long Island?
Well, I think Matt kind of hit the nail on the head. We are doing, and I think most lenders are, taking some steps to shore up the structure for office financing. We're not avoiding it. It is softer than it was, I would say, pre-COVID, but there is still capital to be deployed in the office market. A lot of firms are working remote, or at least partially remote at this point. I don't know that that's going to be a permanent change. I think what we'll end up seeing is some return to office. Some companies will take advantage of the cost save opportunities of having some people work remote. Long Island has benefited from a little bit of the, I'll say, downturn in New York City. And more people are moving to Long Island. We are putting, money out there in the office market.
Let's get to a topic where people, when I bring it up, people say, are you out of your mind? Retail? Okay. How do you look at retail today? And, Long Island was the home of the malls. Okay. The strip shopping centers, the malls, that was the market. Okay. Everybody would, even from New York City, they'd get in their car. 40 years ago, they went to Hempstead. Then they changed location. Then they went to Westbury. Then they went to the Tanger Outlet or something like that. Where do you, all three of you, see the retail, your thoughts on retail in Long Island and any and all, if there are developments taking place? Scott?
Certainly can speak to some of the retail development we've done. We've done a bunch of it over the years, frankly, because when we're looking for senior living properties, the profile is quite similar to retail. We look for high traffic, population density, good demographics. So sometimes we've found sites in our search for senior living, and we've done retail. We've done deals with Stop and Shop and Lowe's Home Improvement and Lifetime Fitness. And those are, larger single tenant properties. They all pay their rent. They're, for the most part, we don't think going anywhere, and we'll weather the storm and come out of COVID. But I do question, what happens to a lot of this brick and mortar retail. There are sectors of retail that probably don't make it. There's a lot of talk about redeveloping shopping malls for residential and other uses. I don't think we haven't seen anything real concrete yet, but I think that's going to be a real phenomenon going forward. I think you will see a lot of these retail uses get repurposed over time.
Chris, as the lender around, what's your thoughts on the retail? I mean, would you entertain a loan on some piece of retail?
We're not completely shying away from retail, but we are being much more careful with retail. And part of it depends on what retail you're talking about. Are you talking about big box retail, a CVS, Walgreens, or are you talking about what you mentioned before, the strip center type of retail that has more small businesses? Small businesses are under strain right now. Small business kind of runs parallel with consumer confidence, which is under some strain right now. So that you have to be even more careful with. You have to shore up structure more. You have to be more conservative with your cash flow, dig into leases more. That we are certainly being very careful with. It isn't shut off by any means, but we are being very careful with it. And I think until we get past the pandemic and really see the ultimate impact of it, we really won't know where that's going. I mean, hopefully more stimulus will help that sector because, again, driven by small business. Vaccines, we get to the second half of this year. Hopefully that'll come back to life a little bit more. And I think all lenders will have a little bit more confidence in that asset class. But we have to get to that point first.
Matt, I'm going to ask you a question because I know that you're a principal also in the repositioning of assets like you did in Island Park, okay? Many people are repositioning, and the recent sale of the Sunrise Mall is probably a major reposition. Where do you see the repositioning of changing the asset and maybe knocking down the retailer and build residential, or build an assisted living, a Bristol assisted living over there, different type of uses?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Michael. And that's going to be a very important point going forward, I think. Retail as a whole, as I see it, as a whole, it's a very challenged market right now. There are some very good retail properties that are doing pretty well. Others are doing very, very poorly and very challenged. I think it's very important, as you and I have discussed in the past, that the politicians start to realize this and they start to move on allowing the rezoning of certain properties that make sense. You mentioned the property down in Island Park, which was a old commercial use. It was a restaurant use, and we were lucky enough to fall within a transit-oriented district. So we were able to get the zoning change to allow for multifamily rental property. Took a good 3 years to get that zoning change, but we were successful in doing that. And now it's a very successful 86-unit rental property. That's a prime example. I think we have to start looking at areas which have already been gentrified to some degree. If you want to think of Farmingdale and Mineola, and areas like certainly Patchogue and Bayshore, they've been very successful in taking underutilized properties, some of them retail, some of it vacant land, and repurposing those properties. And for those, I found from the finance side, lenders are more than willing to finance those properties. Very often, though, it does require the help of the IDA in the form of some kind of tax relief. because even for those underutilized properties and obsolete properties, the land cost is still way too high to make sense without some kind of RDA benefits. But that's been working pretty well, I think. And Nassau County and Suffolk County has seen a nice increase in supply of rental properties, which is sorely needed, but not enough. There's a lot more to go. Many thousands of units are still needed on Long Island in the rental market. And I think Chris and Scott would agree, to get to a healthy rental environment.
Scott, this question is directed at you because you're the king on this market. What's happening with the assisted living? What's the average age of a person going into the assisted living? What's the average amount of time they're staying in assisted living? And where are they coming from?
It's interesting. When we started in this business over 20 years ago now, people would come in their early 80s. And we've seen a trend over time where they're coming in a little bit older and a little bit older. So our average resident now comes in their middle to later 80s. So they're coming in a little bit older, in some cases even a little bit more frail. And the average stay is a little bit shorter than it used to be. So to a certain extent, we're becoming almost an alternative to a nursing home. What we do is high-end private pay model of assisted living. We now have 24 properties across New York and New Jersey under the brand name Bristol. And one of the things we've also been doing in recent years because of this phenomenon is kind of expanding the scope of what we do. So we're now building independent living communities. We're building senior rentals in conjunction with assisted living. And on the other end of the continuum, we're building standalone memory care facilities. We're constructing one right now in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. We're building our memory care communities within the Bristol larger than we have in the past. So that's what we're seeing.
In a way, assisted living is a hospitality asset in certain ways. It's a long-term hospitality asset as opposed to staying in a hotel for 7 days. You may be staying for a couple of months and so on over there. Chris, as the banker, how do you look at the assisted living market? Because, fortunately, the Bristol is the premier out in Long Island and in the region. But how do you look at it in general?
Assisted living, we would certainly take a favorable approach to that. I don't think anybody would argue that there's strong demand for it. Oftentimes for us, assisted living from a size standpoint, project size standpoint, exceeds what our capacity is. So we often are not financing assisted living directly. But if there was a project that fell into a size that we could handle, we would look at it favorably. Again, just thinking about supply and demand dynamics.
Matt?
Assisted living on Long Island is greatly needed as our community ages. And Scott is really the expert in that. But for the 30 some odd years that I've been working on Long Island in the senior housing environment, assisted living has always had tremendous demand. And the Bristol product that Engel Berman is bringing to the market is, at least out here, we consider it to be the premier product.
In the same vein as I said before, retail, I hate to, but I have to bring up hotels. Now, people, Long Island has some wonderful hotels, some large hotels like the Garden City Hotel, the Marriott. Where do you see the hotel market rebounding a little bit? Because I heard around the country, some of the hotels are being converted, the repurposing that we've discussed before, into apartments. Do you see that taking place in Long Island? And what do you see any new hotels in general being built, especially the suite hotels?
It seems like the hotel market on Long Island is not expanding, but you do see and hear about some boutique hotels that are being built on a spot level here and there. I know there's one happening right now in Huntington, and I believe a small one going on right now in East Northport. But by and large, I don't know that much, quite frankly, about the Long Island hotel market. But by and large, right now it's struggling, and I think we're trying to find our low water mark, so to speak, and to see what it will look like post pandemic. That story still has yet to be written, I believe.
Chris?
Yeah, I think Matt's right. It is yet to be written. I think hospitality, that's an industry that, fortunately, we have very little of that in our portfolio, but the hospitality sector that relies on some of those large group gatherings, weddings and other large events, that's going to take time to recover. And I'm not aware of any of the facilities that are being repurposed, but that would not surprise me because that seems to make sense at this point. And we just don't know, like Matt said, we don't know where that's going to go yet. It's really early to tell, but it's definitely it's struggling at the moment.
So here's a question on something I haven't brought up. You know, RXR has been very successful in the Ritz-Carlton property. Do you see more developers building this luxury, especially because of people selling their homes, wanting to no longer be in the house, they want to have an easier life, and they also want the luxury amenities? Do you see more of them being built in Long Island? Scott, Matt, and then Chris.
Absolutely. You know, and the phenomenon really is people who are empty nesters. They lived in their house, like Matt, for 20, 30 years. They've got little or no mortgage, and they're looking for an easier lifestyle. So they can sell their home to a young family. Typically, they can make a lateral move or put some money in their pocket, maybe buy a place in Florida or another location so they can, you know, be a snowbird. And again, I think we're still underserved. And I definitely see growth in that market, both for my company and others. I think you'll see it continue.
So I think in summation, the world in Long Island looks pretty good. And I think people who are developing, who are providing insight to developers, buyers, and to banks, and especially lenders are going to grow. And I'd like to thank Scott, Matt, and Chris, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.